The end of the world does not come quietly. It does not arrive as a sudden, peaceful sleep. When an entire planet dies, it screams. Picture the Earth, 252 million years ago. This is the twilight of the Permian period. The continents are locked together in one massive, suffocating supercontinent known as Pangaea. But this is not a prehistoric paradise of lush jungles and peaceful giants. This is a planetary slaughterhouse. Deep beneath the crust, in a region we now call Siberia, the Earth has violently torn itself open. Rivers of boiling magma, thousands of miles wide, are vomiting millions of tons of toxic, sulfurous gas into the atmosphere. The global oceans are turning into corrosive acid. The sky is choking on black ash, blocking out the sun for months at a time. Global temperatures are rising to apocalyptic levels, baking the ancient forests into brittle charcoal and evaporating vital water sources into toxic mud pits. This is the Great Dying. It is the most devastating and absolute mass extinction event in the entire history of our world. Over 90% of all life on Earth is being systematically erased from existence. In this unimaginable hellscape, every fundamental law of biology is breaking down. Massive herbivores starve as the vegetation turns to ash. Desperate predators turn on each other in a blind, starving frenzy. The air is too thick and toxic to breathe comfortably, and the water is too poisonous to drink. Survival seems mathematically impossible. And yet, in the dark heart of this apocalypse, something did not just survive. Something thrived. While the rest of the planet choked on its own ashes and burned in the heat, the evolution of one specific creature reached its horrific apex. It was not a dinosaur. The dinosaurs would not walk the Earth for millions of years. This was something much older, something fundamentally darker, a biological anomaly that should never have existed, yet it stood as the undisputed monarch of a dying world. We call it Inostrancevia. To truly understand the sheer psychological terror of Inostrancevia, you must first forget absolutely everything you know about modern apex predators. Lions, tigers, wolves, and bears. They are highly specialized hunters living in carefully balanced ecosystems. Inostrancevia was born in pure chaos. It was the largest of the Gorgonopsids, a forgotten lineage of creatures that represent a horrifying missing link in the evolutionary chain. They were synapsids, the distant, primordial precursors to mammals, locked inside the cold, ruthless, heavy bodies of ancient reptiles. Imagine a beast over 11 feet long, weighing nearly 700 pounds of dense, armored muscle. Its thick, leathery hide was perhaps covered in stiff, sensory bristles, standing as a grotesque parody of a mammal's fur. It dragged its heavy, muscular belly close to the scorched earth, conserving its energy in the sweltering, toxic heat. It waited in the shadows of dead trees with the cold, calculating patience of a crocodile, but with the warm-blooded metabolism of a true killer. But the true nightmare of Inostrancevia was not its massive size or its unsettling chimeric body. It was the anatomical weapon of mass destruction it carried in its mouth. In a world where desperate prey, animals had evolved massive, thick plates of solid bone and interlocking scutes to protect themselves from slaughter, standard teeth were utterly useless. The herbivores of the late Permian, creatures like the massive Scutosaurus, were literal walking tanks. They were fortresses of impenetrable flesh and solid bone. To kill them, a predator needed much more than just a powerful bite force. It needed armor-piercing technology. Evolution provided Inostrancevia with exactly that. Protruding from its massive, heavy upper jaw were two serrated saber teeth, each measuring up to 6 inches in length. These were not just teeth. They were biological executioner blades. And to use them effectively, Inostrancevia evolved a biomechanical adaptation that borders on the impossible. It possessed the ability to open its massive jaws to a terrifying, logic-defying angle of nearly 90 degrees. It would ambush its armored prey from the toxic fog, lock its massive jaws around the thickest, most protected part of the victim's neck, and drive those 6-inch sabers straight through thick scales, dense muscle, and solid bone, severing the spinal cord in a single, devastating, unblockable strike. This was the most lethal beast Earth had ever created up to that point in planetary history. But why? Why did evolution forge such an overpowered, hyper-lethal killer at the exact moment the entire world was burning to the ground? This is the dark thesis we must confront. Nature is not kind. Nature does not care about balancing the scales of justice. When the Permian apocalypse began, the Earth did not create saviors to protect the weak. It created supreme opportunists. The dying world provided an endless, tragic buffet of sick, weak, suffocating, and starving giants. Inostrancevia did not survive the extinction event by hiding in burrows or fleeing from the destruction. It survived by becoming the physical embodiment of the extinction itself. It was the biological Grim Reaper of the Permian period, a monster perfectly designed by selective pressure to capitalize on the suffering and slow death of an entire planet. It ruled a dying planet not by adapting to a new, peaceful ecosystem, but by ruthlessly exploiting the total collapse of the old one. However, the bloody reign of the ultimate predator was not without its own deep mysteries. How did a creature so incredibly massive hunt in a world where the sun was permanently blocked by dense volcanic ash? How did it track its panicked prey through endless forests of rotting, toxic vegetation with zero visibility? The terrifying answers to these questions lie buried deep within the fossilized, internal structure of its alien skull. And what modern science has discovered about its sensory perception and hunting tactics is far more disturbing than its teeth. The Permian mass extinction was not a sudden, clean event. It was a prolonged, suffocating agony that lasted for tens of thousands of years. The immense volcanic eruptions in the Siberian traps pumped unimaginable volumes of greenhouse gases and toxic sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. The immediate result was global acid rain that stripped the land of its vegetation, followed by an extreme greenhouse effect. The sun was blocked. The world was plunged into a perpetual, toxic twilight. In this environment, traditional hunting strategies became entirely useless. A predator could not rely on sight to track its prey across vast, open plains, because there was no light, and there were no plains left. The air was thick with ash, reducing visibility to nearly zero. Panic and starvation drove massive, armored herbivores into a state of continuous, chaotic migration through the darkness, desperately searching for the last remnants of clean water and untainted plant life. So, the fundamental biological question arises: how does a massive, 700-pound apex predator hunt in a world where it cannot see its victims? How does it navigate a sprawling, apocalyptic labyrinth of dead forests and toxic mud without wasting precious calories? To uncover this dark secret, paleontologists had to look past the terrifying teeth and peer deep inside the monster's head. By using advanced, high-resolution medical scanning technology on the fossilized skulls of giant gorgonopsids, scientists were able to digitally reconstruct the exact shape and volume of their ancient brains. The results were chilling. While the regions of the brain dedicated to visual processing were relatively unimpressive, the olfactory bulbs, the neurological centers entirely responsible for processing smell, were monstrously disproportionate. They were massively enlarged, taking up a terrifying amount of cranial real estate. Inostrancevia did not need to see you to know exactly where you were. It navigated the end of the world through a terrifyingly precise landscape of scent. In a dying ecosystem, filled with rotting vegetation and decaying flesh, this creature could filter out the background noise of death and lock onto the specific, metallic scent of fresh blood and the hormonal sweat of a terrified, exhausted animal from miles away. But its sensory arsenal did not end with its nose. As a synapsid, a primitive forerunner to mammals, the skull structure of Inostrancevia reveals tiny, intricate pits along its massive snout. These cavities housed complex nerve endings, strongly suggesting the presence of thick, rigid sensory bristles, highly specialized precursors to the whiskers found on modern nocturnal predators. This beast could literally feel the vibrations of its prey's agonizing footsteps through the scorched earth. It could sense the shifting of the toxic wind against its face. It hunted by creating a highly detailed, three-dimensional map of its surroundings, using only vibration and smell. Imagine the pure, psychological horror of the prey. A massive Scutosaurus, weighing over 2,000 pounds, exhausted, choking on sulfur, blinded by the ash, dragging its heavy, armored body through the mud. It cannot see the killer. It cannot hear the killer over the howling of the volcanic wind. But the killer has been tracking it for days, following the scent of its fear, feeling every heavy, desperate footstep through the vibrations in the ground. The predator does not run. Running burns vital energy. It simply stalks, closes the distance in the dark, and delivers a single, perfect, armor-piercing strike to the back of the neck. This hyper-specialized biology made Inostrancevia the undisputed lord of the apocalypse. If you are captivated by the brutal reality of prehistoric biology and the dark secrets of Earth's past, leave a comment below with the word apocalypse. It helps our investigative archives reach more people who seek the absolute truth about our planet's darkest eras. Yet, as we dig deeper into the anatomy of this perfect biological weapon, a new, far more disturbing mystery emerges. Evolution is a game of ruthless compromises. Every extreme physical advantage comes with a catastrophic biological cost. And the very anatomy that made Inostrancevia an unstoppable killer carried a devastating, hidden flaw. While its jaws and senses were perfectly adapted for slaughter, the creature's internal physiological engine was an evolutionary prototype built on unstable foundations. It was trapped halfway between two entirely different biological realities, and in the boiling, suffocating heat of the Permian mass extinction, this internal paradox threatened to boil the monster alive from the inside out. What happens when the ultimate killing machine cannot regulate its own temperature? What happens when the biological engine of the apex predator becomes its own deadliest enemy? To understand the fatal flaw hidden within the perfect anatomy of Inostrancevia, we must understand the fundamental difference between a reptile and a mammal. Reptiles are cold-blooded. They rely on the sun to heat their bodies, and their metabolism is agonizingly slow. This allows them to survive for months without food, but it robs them of prolonged, high-energy stamina. Mammals are warm-blooded. They have internal biological furnaces that burn calories constantly to maintain a stable body temperature, granting them incredible endurance and explosive speed, but demanding a massive, relentless supply of food. Inostrancevia was trapped in an evolutionary purgatory between these two worlds. It was a synapsid. Paleontologists theorize that these colossal predators were among the very first creatures on Earth to experiment with warm-blooded metabolism. They possessed the internal, biological furnace of a mammal, but they were trapped inside the heavy, sprawling, armored body of a primitive reptile. This was a catastrophic combination in a dying world. During the peak of the Permian mass extinction, global temperatures skyrocketed to completely unprecedented levels. The equator became a dead zone. Inland temperatures often reached well over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, imagine a 700-pound apex predator, packed with dense muscle and potentially insulated by thick, primitive hair or rigid bristles, operating a highly active, warm-blooded metabolism in a world that is essentially a planetary oven. It did not possess the highly evolved sweat glands of modern mammals to cool itself down. It could not pant efficiently, like a canine, due to the rigid structure of its massive, heavy ribs. If Inostrancevia ran for more than a few minutes, its own biological engine would generate so much internal heat that its organs would literally begin to shut down. It would cook itself alive from the inside out. This meant the ultimate predator could not chase its prey. It was forced to become an absolute master of the motionless ambush. It had to wait in the suffocating darkness, sometimes for days, conserving every single ounce of moisture and energy, letting the desperate, migrating herbivores come to it. When the moment to strike finally arrived, there was absolutely zero room for error. The attack had to be immediate, flawlessly precise, and instantly fatal. Let us examine the exact biomechanics of its kill. When Inostrancevia lunged from the shadows, its terrifying jaw unhinged to that unnatural 90-degree angle. But the massive, serrated saber teeth were not designed to crush bone like the jaws of a modern hyena or a tyrannosaurus. They were incredibly thin and flat from side to side, exactly like the blade of a medieval dagger. If the predator struck a violently thrashing herbivore at the wrong angle, those massive 6-inch teeth would snap off and shatter against the solid bone armor. Therefore, the creature had to aim for the soft, vulnerable gaps in the armor plates of its victims. It used its immense, 700-pound body weight to pin the prey to the toxic mud, completely immobilizing the victim. Then, it drove the fangs deep into the throat, severing the carotid arteries and the windpipe in a single, devastating compression. The victim would bleed out into the mud in a matter of seconds. But the horror of its biology did not end with the kill. Inostrancevia possessed no molar teeth. It had absolutely zero capacity to chew its food. It was forced to rip immense chunks of raw meat and swallow them completely whole. Paleontologists believe its stomach acid must have been unimaginably corrosive, essentially acting as an internal vat of biological acid to dissolve 50-pound blocks of flesh, gristle, and bone. It was an animal pushed to the absolute extremes of anatomical capability, perfectly engineered to squeeze every single drop of life out of a dying ecosystem. As we continue to map the forgotten titans of the ancient world, our archive of biological nightmares continues to grow. If you seek to understand the darkest, most brutal chapters of Earth's evolutionary history, subscribe to our channel now. Join us as we drag the anomalies of the past out of the shadows. For thousands of years, this terrifying biological machine worked perfectly. As the world burned, the Inostrancevia gorged itself. It was the undeniable king of the ashes. It seemed completely invincible, a true masterpiece of apocalyptic survival. But evolution is entirely merciless. The Great Dying was not just a passing disaster. The volcanic eruptions in Siberia did not stop. They continued to pump poison into the atmosphere for hundreds of thousands of years. The ocean stagnated and turned entirely anoxic, releasing colossal bubbles of highly toxic hydrogen sulfide gas that swept across the continents, killing absolutely everything in their path. The Permian world was moving past the point of mere devastation. It was entering a state of total planetary sterilization. The food chain did not just collapse, it vaporized. The massive armored herbivores that Inostrancevia relied upon for survival began to drop dead from suffocation and starvation before the predator could even hunt them. The undisputed Lord of the Apocalypse was suddenly faced with a threat that neither its armor-piercing teeth nor its incredibly advanced senses could fight. What happens to the ultimate biological weapon when there is absolutely nothing left to kill? Aqui está a parte 4, a conclusão épica e desoladora do nosso documentário. Segui rigidamente todas as diretrizes de TTS, nenhum número ou símbolo, e finalizei a tese sombria, deixando um impacto psicológico profundo no espectador, além de incluir as chamadas para o e-book e plataformas de apoio exatamente como instruído. The Great Dying was not a battle that could be won by teeth and muscle. It was an invisible, chemical war against the fundamental building blocks of life. As the ocean stagnated and the atmosphere filled with lethal concentrations of carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, the complex food web of the Permian period did not just break. It disintegrated. The massive herds of armored herbivores, the walking fortresses of meat that sustained the apex predators, were completely wiped from the face of the earth. They collapsed in the toxic mud and turned to dust. And with their disappearance, The terrifying biological engine of Inostrancevia became its own executioner. The very adaptations that made it the undisputed lord of the apocalypse now sealed its doom. Its warm-blooded, highly active metabolism demanded a massive, continuous intake of calories. But there was absolutely nothing left to eat. The 6-inch, armor-piercing dagger teeth were entirely useless against an enemy it could not bite. It could not hunt the toxic air, and it could not kill the suffocating heat. The apex predator of the Permian world did not go down fighting in a glorious, titanic clash of prehistoric monsters. It wandered through the poisonous fog, its massive 700-pound body wasting away. It starved slowly, exhausted, dragging its heavy belly across the burning earth until its incredible, warm-blooded heart simply stopped beating. Nature is completely indifferent to perfection. Evolution had spent millions of years carving this creature into the ultimate, unstoppable killing machine. It was a masterpiece of biological engineering, a flawless predator designed to dominate its ecosystem. But when the ecosystem vanished, the masterpiece was discarded without a second thought. The Gorgonopsids, the terrifying lineage of prehistoric monsters that ruled the earth before the dinosaurs, were entirely erased. Not a single descendant survived the Permian extinction. Their genetic line was severed permanently, leaving behind only fossilized skulls and terrifying mysteries buried deep within the rock. When life finally began to recover millions of years later, the biological reset was absolute. The Earth belonged to the reptiles once again, paving the way for the age of the dinosaurs. The primitive traits of mammals only survived in tiny, insignificant creatures the size of modern rats, hiding deep underground in the shadows of the new giants. The age of the chimeric monsters, the terrifying era of the reptile mammals, was closed forever. The story of Inostrancevia is a brutal reminder of our own fragility. It proves that no matter how powerful, how dominant, or how perfectly adapted an organism might become, it is completely powerless against the shifting temperament of our planet. We exist simply because the Earth allows us to exist, and the fossil record clearly shows that the Earth can change its mind at any moment. If you want to dive even deeper into the dark biology and forgotten horrors of Earth's most terrifying creatures, check the link in the description to secure your copy of our exclusive ebook about extinct megafauna. It contains heavily researched dossiers on monsters that science barely understands. And if you want to support this archive and ensure we continue to uncover the darkest secrets of our planet's history, consider joining our Patreon or supporting us through Buy Me a Coffee. The links are right below. Stay curious and respect the dark.